Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
All of you who are preparing for the civil service examination should understand the importance of essay paper and pay attention to this. First, this paper is of 250 marks and its weight is around 12.5% in your written plus interview score. This is a significant portion and hence you should prepare this very seriously. Second important aspect is average score of GS paper of the candidates who actually cleared the examination hovers from around 95 to 105 marks. At the same time, average marks of essay for these people is around 130 plus. Toppers usually score 140 plus marks in this paper and take a lead over the competition. Third, essay paper develops on your foundation of general studies, your knowledge and understanding of various subjects, ability to present your ideas lucidly, covering a wide spectrum of interrelated ideas, and inherent skill for presenting your ideas in a systematic and powerful manner helps you in reaping more benefits from your general studies. In order to help you prepare for the essay paper in a systematic and gradual manner, RAU'S has started Mains Essay Test Series and QIP program. The first class of the session will be an open session that all of you can join. The session will take place on 12th of October at 10:30 am. There is a link in the description through which you can register yourself for the session. Attend the session and ensure a better chance for clearing the mains examination.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 9th of October 2020 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now before you go through the analysis of today's DNS, please test yourself through these questions. Try to find out the answers on your own. The answers to these questions shall be displayed at the end of the video discussion. Now the first article appears on page number 7 and is titled as Should the Indian Startups Take on the Global Internet Giants? This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy. Now this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the recent removal of the Paytm app from the Google Play Store by the Google company. In this regard, this particular article, which appears in the form of an interview, discusses the need for the development of the indigenous App Store, just like the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore. This needs to be done in order to boost the mobile app ecosystem and to ensure the digital sovereignty. Now, based upon the article that we are going to discuss here, a UPSC mains question for your practice here could be, in the light of recent concerns raised by the payment app developers, discuss the need for the development of the indigenous App Store in India in order to boost the mobile app ecosystem and ensure the digital sovereignty. As part of this particular video analysis, we'll understand the background to the controversy that has erupted between the Paytm and Google and what questions have been raised over this particular controversy. Nextly, we'll discuss the need for the indigenous development of App Store in India and what steps should be taken in order to boost the mobile app ecosystem. Recently, the Paytm app was briefly removed from the Google Play Store and was unavailable for being downloaded for few hours. The Google company had stated that it removed the Paytm app from its Play Store because the Paytm app did not comply with its policies related to gambling. Earlier, the Paytm company had started a campaign known as the Paytm Cricket League. This campaign allowed the users to get the scratch cards after doing the transaction on the Paytm app. For example, if you're doing a utility bill payment or are doing a mobile recharge, then on doing such transactions, you would be able to get a scratch card and these scratch cards would enable you to get the cashbacks. So in response to this particular campaign, the Google company decided to remove the Paytm app from its Google Play Store. In response, the Paytm company has recently decided to launch its own version of App Store known as the Android Mini App Store. The Mini App Store launched by Paytm app is considered to be a direct challenge to the Google's Play Store. Usually the app developers pay certain amount of charges in order to get their apps listed on the app stores such as say Google Play Store or the Apple iStore and so on. But in case of the Paytm mini app store, the Paytm has stated that it would enable free listing of the Indian mobile apps without payment of any charges. Now this particular issue is basically an issue between two technological companies, a company based in India and a company based in US. In spite of this tussle between Paytm and Google has raised deep-rooted questions over the mobile app ecosystem in India. First and foremost, it has highlighted the abuse of the dominant position by the technological giant companies such as Apple, Google, etc. Now, in case of Paytm versus Google, you must be aware that the Google company has its own payment app, that is the Google Pay. Now, this Google Pay is a direct competitor to the Paytm. Hence, the taking down of the Paytm from the Google's Play Store was in a way a direct conflict of interest and a way to promote the Google Pay ahead of the Paytm. Secondly, you have to realize that the Paytm app is not just a normal gaming or a dating app. It is a payment bank which has been issued the license to operate by the Reserve Bank of India. So who can shut it down? It can be shut down by the Reserve Bank of India, and that to be when it violates the rules and guidelines laid down by the Government of India or the Reserve Bank of India. But in this particular case, the Google company decided to end access to the Paytm app for a number of bank customers, and that to be for the violation of the Google's policy. So will the policy guidelines laid down by the Google company override the policy guidelines laid down by the government or the RBI? Can the Google delist a Indian app on flimsy grounds without giving due regards to Indian rules and regulations? Thirdly, in the era of imperialism and colonization, the British drained away the wealth of India through its trade policies by importing the raw materials from India and then exporting the finished goods to us. But in the digital era, this form of colonization and imperialism takes place through the data. The multinational companies such as Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, etc., they reap huge amount of benefits from harnessing the data of the Indians. The only difference here is earlier, the British used to drain away India's wealth, and now these multinational companies are draining away India's data. Hence, in order to ensure digital sovereignty and Atmanirbhar Bharat in the mobile app ecosystem, some of the experts have pointed out that India needs to have its own homegrown app store, just like the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore. This will enable us to combat the monopoly of the technological giant companies and give a push for the digital economy. So let us try to understand as to why should India needs to have its own homegrown app store like the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore. First and foremost, as we have discussed, the multinational companies such as Google as well as Apple, they are abusing the dominant position which they have in the mobile app ecosystem. Now, for example, presently there are more than 300 plus app stores from where we can download the mobile apps. For example, some of the app stores are the Google Play Store, the Apple iStore, the Samsung Galaxy Store, the Amazon App Store, and so on. In spite of availability of so many choices in the app stores for the downloading of the mobile apps, most of us either use the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore depending upon the operating system of our phone. Why do you think we end up using the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore, and why not the other app stores? This is because our phones come preloaded with these inbuilt app stores. Now, for example, if I buy a Samsung mobile phone that comes preloaded with the Google Play Store, then I would continue to use the Google Play Store rather than using the Samsung Galaxy Store. But the question is, why do these smartphones come with the inbuilt app stores? Now, Google is the one which has developed the Android operating system. Even though Google claims that the Android operating system is a free and open software, in reality, Google company has a form of agreement with various smartphone handset makers, wherein through such agreement, the Google company forces these handset makers to incorporate various Google mobile apps such as the Google Map, Google Chrome, Google Play Store, etc. So if your phone comes preloaded with the Google Chrome, then you won't download the other browsers such as Brave, Mozilla Firefox, Internet Explorer, Opera, etc. So by the virtue of the dominant position which the multinational companies enjoy, they are in a way hindering the development of the other app stores. The second aspect is related to the unfair practices followed by these multinational companies. Now, for example, let's say you have developed a particular mobile app which seeks to provide education to the school students. First and foremost, in order to enable you to get this mobile app listed on the App Store, you would have to pay money to the Google or the Apple company. Secondly, whenever any student pays you money for the utilization of the paid features on this particular app, a certain percentage of commission would have to be paid to these app stores. Now, for example, in case of the Apple company, the commission is as high as 30%. Even the Google company had recently declared that it would charge 30% commission for all the in-app purchases that are done on the gaming apps. However, this particular imposition of charge by the Google company was in turn opposed by a large number of app developers within India, and accordingly the Google company has decided to postpone the charging of commission to the next year. Apart from this, the Google company has also stated that if a particular customer is making any kind of in-app purchases, then all such in-app purchases has to take place through the Google Pay and not through the other payment platforms. So the Google company has stated that some of the categories of apps that are listed on the Play Store which accept the payment from the customers, they should have to compulsorily use the Google Pay for accepting the payment. So if you look at the unfair practices followed by these multinational companies, first and foremost, companies such as Google, they have developed their own operating system. They claim that the Android operating system is free and open software, but they eventually force the companies, mobile manufacturing companies, to incorporate their own Play Store. They charge money from the app developers. Not do they charge just the money, they also collect, store and analyze huge amount of data, and through that they are able to make huge amount of profits. And since they have deep pockets and since they are well established, they are in a way able to stifle competition from their smaller rivals. The next aspect is related to lack of choice to the consumers and the app developers. Out of the total population of 1.3 to 1.4 billion, India has almost around 700 million unique mobile phone subscribers. Globally, the app downloads have increased by 45% in the last 3 years. However, in the last 3 years, the mobile app downloads have increased by almost around 190% in case of India. So India has emerged as one of the most dominant mobile app market across the world in the last 3 years. And since we live in a free market economy, people like me and you should have adequate amount of choice to choose as to which app store do we want to use in order to download the mobile apps. However, in the present ecosystem, we do not have a choice in choosing the app store which we want to use. In a way, we are being forced to use either the Play Store or the Apple iStore. The same can be said even about the app developers as well, wherein they do not have necessary freedom to choose as to which app store they would want to upload their mobile apps. The next aspect is related to the setback to the domestic app ecosystem. The Indian domestic mobile app industry has grown by leaps and bounds. Prime Minister Modi has recently highlighted that the digital gaming has a huge potential at the international level. He has called upon the Indian entrepreneurs to take a lead and develop the apps to boost the mobile app ecosystem. But in the present ecosystem dominated by Google and Apple, an entrepreneur faces multiple costs as well as risk. First and foremost, he is required to pay charges to the Apple iStore or the Google Play Store in order to get his app listed. If he lists his apps on other app stores such as Samsung Store or the Amazon Store, he may not get the due visibility. He is required to pay a certain amount of commission to these app stores for the purchases done by the customers. He is required to comply with the unfair rules and conditions laid down by these multinational companies. And in absence of regulation, as a recent Paytm issue has highlighted, an entrepreneur faces a risk of his app being brought down without any kind of mechanism for the redressal of the grievances. So, Having an indigenously developed app store would help us address these problems faced by the app developers. Further, the regulation of the app stores through an independent authority would help us lay down clear rules and guidelines over various aspects of the listing of the mobile apps on the app stores. The last aspect is related to the digital sovereignty. Both Google as well as Apple have been able to collect a lot of data from their app stores, such as what kind of apps have you downloaded, how much money have you paid for these apps. Now all of these data, including the critical payment related data, gets stored in the overseas servers. This is then used in order to target various kinds of advertisements towards the users. So this particular aspect fundamentally goes against the policy of the data localization which the government has enunciated. Now under the data localization, the government wants that whatever data is generated within India, that data should compulsorily be stored in the servers which are physically located within India. So such a form of data localization in turn has the capacity to boost the digital ecosystem in India. Apart from that, a homegrown app store will also enable the startup companies as well as the domestic companies to get listed without paying any charges, to accept payments from the customers without paying any kind of commission to these app stores. So this in a way will be able to give a push to the mobile app ecosystem. Now coming to last dimension as to what steps should be taken in order to boost the mobile app ecosystem and promote the indigenous development of App Store in India. First and foremost, obviously we would have to find alternatives to the Google Play Store or the Apple iStore. One of the most viable alternative happens to be the Mobile Seva App Store. The Mobile Seva App Store is a governance application that has been developed by Ministry of Electronics and Communication. This Mobile Seva App Store basically enables the download of various government apps for the provision of various government services. Apart from that, the Mobile Seva App Store also provides for the free listing of various apps in India. For example, apps such as Paytm, Uber, Ola, etc. can get listed on the Mobile Seva App Store. Now, recently, the government of India has stated that it would try to promote the Mobile Seva App Store as a full-fledged app store on the lines of the Google Play Store. Now, this strategy of the government of India needs to be fast-tracked and implemented at the earliest. Secondly, as highlighted at the start of our discussion, recently Paytm app has decided to launch its own version of Play Store, which is referred to as the Android Mini App Store. Now, how is this Mini App Store launched by Paytm app different from the Play Store of Google? So in case of the normal App Store, such as the Google Play Store, one needs to download the application into the phone in order to access it. However, in case of the Mini App Store, this is considered to be a web-based service that provides access to various apps as if they are downloaded on your mobile. Now, for example, let's say if you want to access Uber, Zomato or Ola on your mobile phone, there are two options. One, you can download these applications from the Google Play Store. The other option is you can have access to these applications through the Paytm Mini app without downloading them. Now, for example, as you can see here, if you want to have access to the Mini App Store, you have to click on this particular link. The link then takes you to the Mini App Store where there is a listing of all the apps. Now, once you click on any of these apps would not get downloaded. Rather, these apps would get opened in the web browser. So one of the biggest advantage of the Mini App Store is, first and foremost, it saves the phone memory because there is no need to install the mobile apps. And secondly, it saves the data as well, which otherwise gets used up for downloading the mobile apps. So the Mini App Store in a way acts as a super app. It is quite different from the other app stores. It does not require the download of apps, and hence it is considered to be superior over the existing app stores. So going forward, we need to encourage companies with large traffic on their mobile applications such as Amazon, Flipkart, Swiggy, Uber, etc. to have their own mini app stores. Nextly, we have to realize that we cannot be self-reliant in the field of mobile app ecosystem without being self-reliant in mobile phone manufacturing. Most of the mobile phones which are sold in India are basically Chinese, and these Chinese mobile phones come preloaded with their own apps as well as Play Stores. So going forward, we need to boost the indigenous manufacturing of mobile phones in India. Just like how the Android operating system comes preloaded with the Google applications, we need to ensure that the mobile phones manufactured in India come preloaded with our App Store, such as the Mobile Seva App Store. And lastly, we need to strengthen the role of the Competition Commission of India in order to handle the abuse of the dominant position by the multinational companies such as Google as well as Apple. The next article appears on page number 4 and is titled as "Freeze the Assam Scheduled Tribe List for Good," says the tribal body. This article shall be important from the perspective of prelims, polity and governance. Now in case of Assam, we do have two categories of scheduled tribes. The first category of scheduled tribes include those people who are living in plains, and the second category include those people who live in the hills. So in case of Assam, we have 14 categories of scheduled tribes from the plain areas and 15 categories of scheduled tribes from the hilly areas. Now recently the Assam government has proposed to include the 6 communities from the plain areas in the list of the scheduled tribes. Some of these communities include Ahom, Matak, Moran, etc. However, the inclusion of these 6 communities into the list of the scheduled tribes has been opposed by the other tribal groups. The other tribal groups in Assam have been demanding the Assam government to freeze the scheduled tribe list for the plain areas and do not include more number of tribal groups into this particular list. In this regard, from the perspective of polity and governance, let us understand some of the provisions related to the identification of the scheduled tribes. Now, the framers of the Indian Constitution realized that certain communities in the country were suffering from extreme social, educational and economic backwardness on account of their primitive agricultural practices, lack of infrastructure facilities and geographical isolation. Accordingly, we have Article 366, Clause 24 of the Indian Constitution. This prescribes that the scheduled tribes means such tribes or tribal communities as deemed under Article 342 of the Indian Constitution. Now, Article 342 of the Indian Constitution provides that the President of India can notify the list of the scheduled tribes in a particular state in consultation with the governor. So the list of scheduled tribes in India is state specific, and a community which is declared as a scheduled tribe in a particular state need not be so in another state. And once this particular list is notified by the President, the Parliament of India can include or exclude the tribes from this particular list. So based upon the Article 342 of the Indian Constitution, the Parliament of India has enacted the Constitution Scheduled Tribes Order 1950. This particular order basically contains a list of tribes or the groups who have been designated as scheduled tribes in case of India. This order is amended from time to time to include more number of communities as the scheduled tribes. With respect to the criteria that is taken by the government in order to designate a particular community as the scheduled tribe, you need to understand here that the Indian Constitution as such is silent about the criteria for the specification of the community as a scheduled tribe, which means under the Indian Constitution, there is no explicit provision for the criteria to designate a community as a scheduled tribe. Usually, the government of India looks at certain traits or the indicators that distinguish the scheduled tribe communities of a country from the other communities. For example, we can look at the indications of the primitive traits of a particular community, the distinctive culture, geographical isolation, shyness of a contact with the community at large, the backwardness of a community, and so on. Now, based upon this particular criteria, more than 700 communities within India have been designated as the scheduled tribes, and they account for almost up to 8.6% of India's population as per the census of 2011. Now, the state which has the highest scheduled tribe population in terms of absolute value, this include Madhya Pradesh, followed by Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. The state or the union territory with the highest percentage of the ST population include Lakshadweep, followed by Mizoram and Nagaland. The state or the union territory in which no community has been notified as a scheduled tribe include Delhi, NCR, Punjab, Haryana, Chandigarh, Pondicherry. Now these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Now, the next article appears on page number 1 and is titled as Quarter 2 of the financial year record 107% surge in the fresh investment. This article shall be important from the perspective of prelims Indian economy. This particular article highlights that in the second quarter of the financial year 2020-21, there has been overall increase in the investment by almost 107% in comparison to the first quarter of the present financial year. In the second quarter, almost up to 2,200 projects across India are set to be launched with a total investment of almost around 2.20 lakh crores. Now this is considered to be quite important because in the first quarter of the financial year, the GDP growth rate registered a contraction by almost 24%. That is, the GDP growth rate registered a negative growth rate of minus 24. Because of this, concerns have been raised that Indian economy may face a contraction in its GDP for the present financial year for the first time in the last 41 years since the year 1971. Now this particular contraction in the first quarter basically took place on account of the decline in the private final consumption expenditure as well as the investment. So the very fact that in the second quarter of the financial year, the investment rate has picked up, this shows that the Indian economy may be showing a V-shaped recovery process. So this particular concept of investment is technically referred to as the gross fixed capital formation, which is in turn used for the GDP calculation. So as far as the prelims is concerned, one needs to be aware about the concept of the gross capital formation, the gross fixed capital formation, and the trends in the investment rates. Now these concepts are important because if you have a look at the previous year prelims questions have been asked with respect to the economic terms as well as the trends in the important economic indicators. See, when we calculate the GDP according to the expenditure method, we take into account 4 different variables. These variables are the private final consumption expenditure, the government final consumption expenditure, the gross investment, and the net exports. And as you can see here, the private final consumption expenditure accounts for 60% of our GDP. This is followed by the gross investment that accounts for 31% of the GDP. The government final consumption expenditure accounts for 12%. The net exports, that is calculated as the total exports minus the total imports, its contribution is minus 3%, and this clearly shows that our imports as such are much higher than the overall exports. Now when we say the gross investment that is used to calculate the GDP, the gross investment here is referred to as the gross capital formation. The gross capital formation has basically 3 components. These 3 components are the gross fixed capital formation, changes in stocks, and the net acquisition of the variables. With respect to the first component, that is the gross fixed capital formation, this is basically the expenditure that is incurred for the construction of the fixed assets. This can include the construction of the fixed assets such as housing, roads, railways, the procurement of machinery and equipment, the investment in intellectual property rights such as the research and development, software, etc. Apart from that, we do have a unique component of the cultivated biological resources, that is the increment in livestock and plantation that is used in order to calculate the gross fixed capital formation by the National Statistical Office. With reference to the third component, that is the cultivated biological resources including the increment in livestock. Let's say in the year 2019, a particular farmer had almost 100 livestock, and in the year 2020, this has increased to almost around 150. So this means that there has been increase in the livestock by almost 50. So this increment in the livestock of 50 is considered as a gross fixed capital formation under the component of the cultivated biological resources. So one of the most important aspects which you should know with respect to prelims is when we say the gross fixed capital formation, this not only includes the investment made in the fixed assets, but It also includes the investment in the intellectual property rights as well as the cultivated biological resources, which in turn includes the livestock as well as the plantation. The next component is the changes in stocks, that is referred to as increase in the stock of inventories. Now, when we calculate the GDP is calculated by taking into account the market value of all the final goods and services produced within the territory of India for a particular year. Now the question is, what happens to those commodities that remain unsold? Now for example, let's say in the year 2019, we produce almost 100 pence. But what if only 80 pence are sold in the Indian economy for the year 2019? 20 pence may remain unsold. So what do we do with these 20 pence? For the calculation of the GDP, now what we actually do is we put these 20 pence into our godowns or the inventories. Accordingly, the number of pence which are held in godowns in the year 2019 increases by 20. So this particular increase in the stock of inventories is thus calculated as the changes in stocks and added for the GDP calculation. So for example, let's say at the start of the financial year 2019, we had 80 pence in our inventories, and by the end of the year 2019 the number of pence in the inventories has increased to 100. So we have an increase in the inventories by 20, and this 20 is in turn calculated for the GDP calculation. Similarly, let's say at the start of the financial year 2020 we had 100 pence in the inventories, and by the end of the financial year 2020 the number of pence in the inventories has increased by 150. So this increase of by 50 in terms of inventories is added for our GDP calculation. The next component is the net acquisition of the valuables. This is basically the expenditure incurred by the households on the valuables such as gold, precious stones, jewelry and so on. So the money spent by the households on these valuables, this is not considered to be the part of the private final consumption expenditure. Rather, it is considered to be part of the net acquisition of valuables, which in turn is part of the gross capital formation. Normally, when we come across the term investment refers to the gross fixed capital formation. However, the gross capital formation is much broader, and this includes the gross fixed capital formation, the changes in stocks, as well as the net acquisition of the valuables. As far as the trends in the fixed investment rate in the Indian economy is concerned, as you can see here, at the start of the year 2011-12, the investment rate in the Indian economy was as high as around 35%. However, since then there has been a gradual decline in the fixed investment rate, so much so that in the financial year 2018-19, the investment rate has dropped down to almost around 30% of India's GDP. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. This particular article appears on page number 6 and is titled as Keeping Vigil Even During the Unusual Times. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 2 Polity and Governance. So the government of India as well as number of state governments are undertaking huge amount of expenditure in order to deal with the health disaster caused due to the COVID-19 pandemic. During such times, certain rules and regulations may have to be relaxed to expedite the expenditure and ensure the faster relief to the people. For example, the procurement of the PPE kits, the procurement of medicines, sanitizers, etc. in the government hospitals may have to be fast-tracked. This can lead to saving of lives as well as reduce the sufferings. However, at the same time, we have to realize that the disasters such as the COVID-19 pandemic also presents an opportunity for the government officials to bend rules in their favor and engage in corruption. For example, for the procurement of the PPE kits, the well-established rules and regulations may not be followed. There could be a nexus between the PPE kit manufacturers and the government officials, leading to the procurement of the inferior quality kits. In this regard, this particular article here discusses as to what should be the role of the Office of CAG during the health disasters. As you all must be aware, the Office of CAG has been provided under Article 148 of the Indian Constitution. The duties, powers and conditions of the office of CAG has been laid down under the CAG DPC Act 1971. One of the most important role of the CAG is to carry out the audits of the central government and the state government's accounts. The CAG basically carries out three types of audits. These audits are the financial audit, compliance audit and the performance audit. Through the financial audit, the CAG basically ascertains whether the government agency has followed all the accounting standards or not. As part of the compliance audit, the office of CAG basically ensures that the money that is spent by the government of India, was it sanctioned by the parliament, whether the money has been spent for the purpose for which it was sanctioned, whether the money has been spent by following all the relevant rules and regulations or not. As far as the performance audit is concerned, the performance audit is actually a form of discretionary audit to be carried out by the office of CAG. Through the performance audit, the office of CAG goes beyond the compliance audit and tries to ensure that the government is undertaking expenditure both efficiently as well as effectively. Now, for example, let's say the office of CAG is carrying out the performance audit of the National Health Mission. Now, through such performance audit, the office of CAG will try to ascertain as to how many beneficiaries have actually got benefited through the National Health Mission, whether whatever money that has it led to the intended outputs as well as the outcomes, whether the government expenditure has been able to bring about a reduction in the infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, etc. Thus, carrying out of the performance audit is considered to be one of the most important functions of the office of CAG. Accordingly, this particular article highlights that during the health disasters, the need to carry out the performance audit increases even more. Through such performance audit, the office of CAG should highlight various lacunae in the measures which have been put forth by the government agencies for both disaster prevention as well as disaster preparedness. The office of CAG should try to highlight various flaws with respect to rules and regulations which have been laid down for the procurement of various medical equipment, procurement of drugs, etc. The office of CAG should ensure that these rules and regulations are able to provide the necessary flexibility to the government officials, but at the same time ensure that these rules and regulations provide for the transparency and accountability in order to avoid the corruption. The CAG should also ensure economy, efficiency and effectiveness of the government expenditure and try to ascertain as to what benefits have accrued to the intended beneficiaries. So if the CAG believes that the beneficiaries as such have not been benefited due to the government's expenditure, then the CAG should highlight the problems in the government expenditure so that the government agencies can take corrective action. Secondly, as you all must be aware, the CAG is considered to be the eyes, ears and nose of the Public Accounts Committee. Accordingly, this article highlights that the office of CAG needs to work in the close coordination with the Public Accounts Committee. This article highlights that the office of CAG has recently worked in close coordination with the Karnataka Legislature's Public Accounts Committee in order to ensure greater amount of transparency and accountability in the government procurement. Accordingly, the office of CAG during such health disasters must work closely with the Public Accounts Committee. This will provide the necessary assurances to the taxpayers the government is utilizing the taxpayers' money efficiently. Apart from that, when the CAG is working in close coordination with the Public Accounts Committee, this will also help us to prevent corruption among the government officials. And lastly, the article highlights that the CAG must also carry out the audit of the National Disaster Response Fund and the State Disaster Response Fund. Now, the Disaster Management Act 2005 provides for the NDRF at the central government level and SDRF at the state government level. Both these funds have been set up in order to meet the rescue and relief expenditure during any kind of notified disasters. So please do note that the funds lying under NDRF and SDRF cannot be used by the government of India for the payment of compensation. It can be used only for providing immediate relief to the people. Now, the NDRF is basically funded through the imposition of the National Calamity Contingency Duty, which is basically imposed on some of the goods such as cigarettes, crude oil, etc. And this NDRF, it is not maintained as part of the Consolidated Fund of India. Rather, it is maintained as part of the public account. As far as the SDRF is concerned, to the SDRF, the center contributes 75% of the funds, whereas the remaining 25% of the funds are contributed by the respective state governments. So at any point of time, the state governments do have requisite amount of funds lying under their respective SDRF in order to deal with any kind of natural calamities. So if the overall funds lying under the SDRF is lower in order to deal with a particular disaster, then the central government comes into picture and it provides the necessary funding to the states from the National Disaster Response Fund. Now this is what you have to know with respect to this particular article. If you want to know certain basic details about the office of CAG, then I suggest you to go through the DNS dated 9th of August 2020. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 6 in the form of an editorial and is titled as Avoidable Uncertainty. Today, that is October 9, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank of India is set to release the monetary policy statement. Earlier, the MPC was required to come out with a statement on October 1st. However, it was not able to do so because there were vacancies in the Monetary Policy Committee. Now, if you look at MPC has basically 6 members, out of which 3 members are from the Reserve Bank of India and 3 members are nominated by the Government of India. Now, these members who are nominated by the government, they were nominated in the year 2016. They had a tenure of 4 years. So, the tenure of these 3 government members ended recently in the year 2020. So, the Government of India was required to nominate new members to the Monetary Policy Committee. So since there was a delay in the nomination of the members to the MPC by the Government of India, the MPC is set to come out with a monetary policy statement on October 9 instead of the October 1. In this regard, this particular article highlights that the Government of India was well aware that the Monetary Policy Committee is set to have vacancy and there could be a delay in the announcement of the monetary policy statement. Considering the fact that the Indian economy is going through a really tough phase, the Government of India should have filled up the vacancy on time. Now, in this particular context, let us understand some of the important aspects of the Monetary Policy Committee from the perspective of the UPSC prelims examination. As you all must be aware, the basic mandate of the Monetary Policy Committee is to control the rate of inflation. This has been provided under the Monetary Policy Framework Agreement that has been signed between the RBI and the central government. The Monetary Policy Committee is required to keep the CPI rate of inflation between 2 to 6% and ideally at 4%. Please do note here that the rate of inflation that we are targeting, it is a CPI rate of inflation and it is not the WPI rate of inflation. Now this aspect is important because it was asked in prelims 2020. So if the Monetary Policy Committee fails to meet the target set under the Monetary Policy Framework Agreement, then it is required to submit a report to the Government of India stating the reasons for its failure. Now this MPC was actually set up in the year 2016 based upon the recommendations of the Urjit Patel Committee. Prior to the setting up of the Monetary Policy Committee, the formulation of the monetary policy was entirely under the control of the RBI Governor, who was in turn assisted by the Technical Advisory Committee. So the Urjit Patel Committee, based upon the experience of other countries, suggested that we need to adopt a committee-based approach, and hence the Monetary Policy Committee has come into being. Please do note that the MPC has been set up in accordance with Section 45ZB of the RBI Act. More importantly, there is no need for you to remember this particular section, but please do remember that the MPC is a statutory body which has been set up under the RBI Act 1934. As highlighted, the MPC has 6 members, 3 members from the RBI and 3 members from the government. The 3 members from the RBI are the RBI Governor, who also acts as a chairperson, the Deputy Governor of the RBI, who is in charge of the formulation of the monetary policy, and an officer of the RBI who is nominated by the Central Board. As far as the conditions of office of the government nominees are concerned, They need to be expert in the field of economics, banking or finance. They are appointed by the Cabinet Committee on Appointments based upon the recommendations of a search cum selection committee which is headed by the Cabinet Secretary. They are appointed for a period of 4 years and they are not eligible for reappointment. The MPC is required to meet at least 4 times in a single year, but usually the Monetary Policy Committee meets every 2 months. The quorum, as discussed before, is 4 members. Now all the decisions by the Monetary Policy Committee take place through voting, wherein one member is been given 1 vote. All the decisions are based upon majority, but the problem here is the MPC has even number of members, that is 6. So there could be an event of equality of votes. So in case equality of votes take place, then the governor can exercise a second or a casting vote. So this exercise of second or the casting vote by the RBI governor, who also acts as chairperson of the MPC, will in turn help break the deadlock between the members of the MPC. So this is what you have to know with respect to this particular editorial. With this, we have come to the end of our discussion. The answers to the questions that were posed before the start of our discussion has been presented on your screen. Let us now have a look at the question for the day.